Welcome, my friends, to the Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, Sofia Smallstorm returns to the show. Sofia discusses her research into the history of viruses and how the current mainstream medical viewpoint may have a few holes in it. And so, without further ado, here's the conversation with Sofia. Well, folks, we have a great show for you today, and took a little bit of a break over the holidays. I had a couple of shows go out. They were some shows that were actually in the hopper before I took the break, but it's now 2019. We're in January, and what better way to kick it off than with a show with my very good friend Sofia Smallstorm. And Sofia had a newsletter going back to the November time frame, which is excellent, and it has to do with viruses. And Sofia takes us through what viruses may or may not be. And there was a tremendous amount of information in it, and it was extremely thought-provoking. So, and I know you kicked it off with Charlie Sheen and his HIV test being positive and all that stuff. And I thought that was a great way to kick it off because it kind of segued nicely into the rest of the newsletter. So I know that was kind of a little bit of a lengthy intro there, but so welcome back. And I think this is a great way to kick it off in 2019 with this particular newsletter.
Happy New Year. Yes, Mike, I'm very happy to be back with you on a show. And the silence was deafening for the last 2 months. No shows with Mike. What am I going to do? But it helped me, that silence helped me to burrow down and write this newsletter, which is full of lots of there's different componentry in it. And I did start with Charlie Sheen, whose HIV positivity somehow I missed. Did you know this about him?
I remember when it was announced, yes. I didn't pay much attention to it, but I did remember that he did come out and say, or the news came out and said that he was HIV positive. But like I said, I didn't pay much attention to it after that. I was never a really big Charlie Sheen fan.
Mike, they say that Charlie Sheen did more for HIV education than the United Nations. That's actually pretty funny.
It is funny, but it's also a statement of how our society operates, right? So it all comes through the television set and the media. So it would make sense that Charlie Sheen would be a bigger spokesperson for HIV than the UN.
Now, here's what we need to look at when it comes to this thing called HIV. I read Nancy Banks' book, Dr. Nancy Banks, and the title of that book is AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire. And I typically mark books with stickies on pages, and then I mark sections which I need to remember to look for again. And her book is such a mass of stickies, I've made it like 1.5 times as thick as it was to start with, and it was thick. But anyway, you open that book, and the very beginning of that book has a list of conditions that will very likely give you a positive outcome on an HIV test. And these conditions are so ordinary, Mike, meaning that they're commonplace. They're not unusual. And I'll read a few of them. Leprosy, tuberculosis, kidney failure, flu, herpes 1 and herpes 2, upper respiratory tract infection, malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, organ transplantation, various autoimmune diseases, hepatitis, alcoholic liver disease, hemophilia. Okay, so there are many, many conditions that different kinds of people have, and that'll give you an HIV positive test. Now, what is that all about, right? Well, what it's about is that the HIV test is a non-specific antibody test. Now, I want people, you don't have to be a scientist or a doctor to get what this means. Non-specific antibodies. What does that say to you?
Well, it says that it's not specific, that it's not targeted, and it seems to me to be, maybe perhaps you correct me if I'm wrong, kind of a catch-all, general categorization of something?
Yes. And this means that anyone at any time could possibly have a positive HIV result. So what do they normally tell you? They tell you to take the test and come back in 6 months and have another one taken because they know that it's a non-specific antibody test. And if you get a positive outcome twice, then they can really put the fear of God in you and tell you that, oh, now you run the likelihood of coming down with AIDS and you have to take our drug cocktails and be very careful and not have sex partners and this and that. All right? So when you understand that whatever this thing is called acquired immune deficiency, what Nancy Banks explains to us in the most crystal clear terms is that people's systems start to fail when they have too much oxidative stress. Cellular oxidation. It means depletion of energy in the cells. And when your cells start to tire out in whatever organ system they happen to live or whatever kind of tissue they make up, Mike, this is when you get a disease. A disease is ailing, flailing, floundering, dying cells that are crying out for help.
Now, that makes perfect sense to me, Sophia. And for those of us that are digging into a lot of this type of material, especially modern day medicine and so on, we're really starting to get a handle on and understand that these categorizations that they have and these diagnoses that they have, many times there's not a whole lot of specificity behind what it is that they're diagnosing us with. And so, like, I read through the list too, but the flu is just something that everybody's going to get and everybody has had. So it's just interesting to me that they took symptoms and they made it into something very elaborate. They made it into something very scary. They made it into something very fearful. That speaks of what? It speaks of perhaps the next steps or some kind of an agenda. Something's going to follow that. There's a reason why they did that.
Mind control and programming.
Yep.
Okay, so Mike, get this. Polio. We all remember the polio vaccine and the polio scare, and then we were told that the polio vaccine took away polio, and we should all be so happy. But the fact is that there is this condition, the Mayo Clinic, you can go to their website, it's called non-paralytic polio. And here are the symptoms. I'm going to read them out to you. Fever, sore throat, headache, vomiting, fatigue, back pain or stiffness, neck pain or stiffness, arm or leg pain or stiffness, muscle weakness or tenderness. Now listen, this is polio? What? And they say that lots of people have had polio and never even knew that they had it. So what they tried to do, in my opinion, Mike, I'm just going to cut to the chase here a little bit. They scared us with something that really was paralyzing people. And let's look back to the 1800s. When did they first start discovering this disease called palsy, P-A-L-S-Y, nervous system disease? They were discovering palsies in children, which were occurring at a very rapid, increased rate in the late 1800s. And these were children who lived near apple orchards in Massachusetts and the northeastern United States, where they had just begun to use chemical pesticides. And let's call this the existing health authorities at the time, people looking at public health. It was very, very tiny infrastructure at that time, but they knew what this was about. Did they do anything about it? No. They continued to spray chemicals, and children continued to become sick and paralyzed. Now, what did the 1900s bring us? They brought us the industrial age, the chemical age, and the radiation age. And they gave us this huge new way of thinking, the war on germs. This was another baby, a giant birth of the 1900s, thanks to Louis Pasteur. So they told us germs are everywhere, and these are the things that make you sick, and we have to eradicate germs. And so through advertising, and because they were getting more into commerce and production of goods, manufacturing, they sold the housewives of the mid-1900s tons of chemical cleaners, tons of chemical concoctions, including DDT, which was a very, very big culprit here. And housewives of that time were actually sprinkling DDT out of cans, shaker cans, into their children's lunch sandwiches. And I've seen video footage of trucks going through parks and whatnot in the summertime where children are bathing in public pools, and the trucks just pull out a hose and they spray all the kids in the whole pool with DDT. So, in spite of the war on germs and all the ways that people clean their houses with Clorox and Lysol and stuff like this, people still got sick. It didn't take away sickness.
No, it didn't take away sickness. They were finding reasons, or they were trying to put in place a reason as to why people were getting sick. They had to find culprits in order to be able to explain why these diseases were coming about. They were trying to come up with an alibi.
When it became clear that the war on germs wasn't working, and people, especially children, were still becoming paralyzed and sick and having these quote-unquote flus, they invented the virus. They said, oh, there's something worse than germs, and it's much smaller, and it's inorganic, and it's very infectious, and it will get into people's bodies, and then it will multiply, and it mutates, and all of this stuff. So they created another culprit of a different kind, smaller and worse. And they then waged their movement of virology, this new science, and this war against viruses. So what enabled them to see anything at all that they began to call a virus? It was the electron microscope. And the electron microscope was really conceived, the idea of it, by this guy called Leo Szilard. He was born in 1898 in what was then the Kingdom of Hungary. And he became a mastermind behind. He was an inventor, a physicist, and a genius, real genius. He moved to America, and he is one of the masterminds of the kind of world we're living in today. So Szilard, along with Einstein, wrote a letter to President Roosevelt, and this was August 1939, and they proposed the Manhattan Project. And Szilard was also a co-holder with Enrico Fermi on the patent for the nuclear reactor. So at the time, this was called the Uranium Project, and then later it expanded into the Manhattan Project. And seriously, Szilard was so talented and such an innovator and he had such a creative mind that he was given a position at University of Chicago. He became a professor, and he started to dabble in biology. And he had done a lot of innovation in physics. Now he was ready to do it in biology. So this electron microscope was something that was created and needed a centrifuge because the electron microscope has to separate solids from liquids. It has to isolate. It has to ensure that examination is done of whatever it is done in a vacuum. So to start with, nothing living is going to remain alive if you stick it under the electron microscope to look at, because you've got to create a vacuum. And when they began to use the electron microscope, this was the age of polio. They were looking for what's the cause of polio. And they were taking tissue samples from paralyzed children and looking at them under the electron microscope, and they saw, I kid you not, something that they called fuzzy white dots. And they decided that these fuzzy white dots had to be the cause of polio and that these were viruses. But if you are riding your bicycle and you see broken glass on the ground, any kid knows that he shouldn't ride his bike through the broken glass because an accident was there and his bike tires are going to be sliced by the glass. But that is the kind of logic that you develop from experience. But if you go the other way and you say that, oh, I see broken glass, that means an accident will happen. Is that correct? No. The broken glass is left over after the accident. It's not the reason there becomes an accident. It's not the cause of the accident. And I thought this is a very clever, very clear analogy.
Well, it's also interesting to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that with the advent of the electron microscope, they were seeing things that they were never able to see before. So it's interesting to me, as I was reading the newsletter, that they would see these fuzzy white dots, and conclude that was the polio virus. How would they know that, since up until that point, they hadn't examined anything with the electron microscope? In other words, the electron microscope was bringing into focus and bringing into awareness things that you couldn't see before. So I would think that you would have to do extensive amount of studying under the electron microscope to be able to begin to discern what's supposed to be there and what is not supposed to be there. It just seemed to me like they looked under the electron microscope, and maybe I'm wrong here, and they made certain assertions. They jumped to certain conclusions. They saw fuzzy white dots and they said, aha, that's the polio virus. Did I get that wrong? Did I understand that incorrectly?
Well, I think what you're trying to say is, it's like let's say the body is an accident, has the accident site in it. So when you go driving up to the accident site in the body and you see broken glass, that would be the fuzzy white dots. You say, oh, this correlates to an accident. Now, either you say, as we know in our lives, that the broken glass happens after the accident, not before, and the broken glass doesn't cause the accident. So when they're driving up in the body and they see the white dots, the broken glass, they concluded that the broken glass causes the accident. It caused the accident, but it didn't. It's an after effect. Smash, glass breaks, now there's broken glass on the ground. So when you go into the body and you see these things, what are you really looking at? That's the big $64,000 question. That's not the crippling agent. That is, in fact, the healing agent sent to that crippled area or that injured area for repair purposes. Now, what I found, because I started to Google viruses, right? And I found out that one of the earliest viruses anybody ever saw. Now, this wasn't the electron microscope enabling this. It was the regular microscope. But again, electron microscope just makes things clearer and shows the formation of these things, of these so-called viruses. So let's go to Dmitry Ivanovsky. This is the end of the 1800s, 1892. He was a Russian botanist, and he is considered to be one of the founding fathers of virology. He was looking at what's called spot disease, tobacco mosaic virus. And the tobacco mosaic virus affects tobacco plants, but it also affects tomatoes, orchids, cucumbers, lots of different kinds of plants. When the leaves become discolored, they become crinkled, dry, brittle. It's usually because there's stress on the plant. Now, interestingly enough, it doesn't kill the plants. It just stunts them. This tobacco mosaic virus, it's called TMV, spot disease. So Ivanovsky is looking through his microscope at the spotty leaves, and he sees something that he decides has to be the cause of spot disease. He decides this is tobacco mosaic virus. And he starts to find out that he can transfer this material. Now, he's not looking at it very clearly because he can't. He's only using a light microscope. So he can transfer this material to the cells of healthy plants, and it actually transfers. Now, that was a light bulb going off in his head. So I continued to read the page, and I thought, well, all right, here at the bottom this is Wikipedia, for God's sake, investigational uses. So I'm going to read it to you. Due to its cylindrical shape, high aspect ratio, self-assembling nature, and ability to incorporate metal coatings, nickel and cobalt, into its shell, TMV, tobacco mosaic virus, is an ideal candidate to be incorporated into battery electrodes. Addition of TMV to a battery electrode increases the reactive surface area by an order of magnitude, resulting in an increase in the battery's capacity by up to 6 times, Mike. So I'm reading this going, what? There's some kind of electrical amplification that it manages to do? What's all that about? And then it hit me that these bits, these subcellular bits that they're calling viruses, crystalline, cylindrical in shape, ability to incorporate into metal coatings, etc., these are piezoelectric creations by the body, and they are sent to cells to heighten the cell's electrical capacity. because that's what life is. Fundamentally, it's electricity on the cellular level. So when you get a sick cell that's ailing and flailing and dying, and it's calling out to the intel system of the body, the immune system, and it goes, hey, you got to do something, help me. What happens? A material is created that's smaller than the cell. It's crystalline in nature. It's even got a sugar coating on it, I learned from somebody who's researched this very broadly and deeply. And it goes up to the cell and it goes, hello, let me help you with your electricity. That's a virus. It's a helper agent. And when these people using the electron microscope and any other microscope, they were finding this material in tissues that were sick, they erroneously concluded that this is the cause of the sickness. It is not the result. It is not the body going, here, let me give you this. It's going to help you out.
Yeah, so let me make sure I understand, Sophia. So are we saying that the virus is actually helping in the process versus being a detriment? Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, viruses are, some people call them self-proteins. They are individually made, meaning the recipe for what's going to help your cells deal with whatever sickness you have is an individual recipe. It's ordered by the intel system of your body, and it's shipped to your body's damaged or injured area, and it goes to work by amplifying the, let's call it the voltage in the cell. And what makes me so excited about this, Mike, is that I have been looking at videos, presentations by Dr. Jerry Tennant, Tennant. And the headline on his presentations is always something like this: healing is voltage. And I have written about Dr. Tennant in previous newsletters. A cell needs electrons, voltage, in order to do its basic maintenance. When it's sick, when it's broken down, when it's dying, when it's failing, it needs more voltage. And that makes sense, right?
Right.
So if a virus can amplify, let's say, or increase a battery's capacity by 6 times, a biological virus, when you smear it on a battery electrode, it has got to have electrical properties that increase voltage. So my mind said a virus is a helpful component that the body manufactures, sends it over to an area that's sick. The virus knows how to, quote unquote, infect the cell. This is what became very, very interesting to the polio vaccine developers. And it was actually Leo Szilard whose work with radiation enabled them to find a way to piggyback what they were calling the polio virus into a cell line called the HeLa cell. And we can get into that. And that subsequently, that combination was put in all the polio vaccines.
Okay, so then the virus increases voltage. So what we're hypothesizing here is that this increase in voltage is actually beneficial to healing.
We're not hypothesizing that. That is known. That's the ABCs of bioelectricity.
Well, I won't use the word hypothesize, but I was using it in the context of mainstream science would say that what we're talking about here is incorrect, that viruses are bad, is what they would say, right?
Well, yeah, because viruses are bad. They make you sick. Let's make an injection. Let's put it in a hypodermic syringe. Let's make a vaccine. We'll give you some of this bad stuff, and then your body in such a small quantity won't mind, and it'll make antibodies to it. That's the thesis behind vaccines. When they look at quote-unquote diseased tissue and they see what they quote-unquote call viruses, they're not seeing the cause of the disease. They're seeing some body's creation, biological creation, that is crystalline, piezoelectric, sugar-coated, subcellular in size, and that's not made to be in everybody's body. This is another giant hazard that they've created among the many that vaccines have shoveled out or dished out on us. These are specific self-made materials for one particular ailing person taken from their body. I mean, seriously, if you want to study the way the early vaccines were made, it's sickening. And they still are. They're made with absolutely disgusting materials. The early ones were rabbit brains suspended in toxic phenol. They would scrape contents of intestines. They would desiccate and chop up human spinal cords. They would use human stools in saline solution. And they would inject this into the brains of rhesus monkeys and animals. And what happened? Well, the animals became paralyzed. And that paralysis was equated with polio. But come on, if somebody put this crap in your brain, in your nervous system, wouldn't your nervous system suddenly collapse? Maybe even terminally? So the concoctions that constitute vaccines are unknown. The nature of them is really unknown, even to the pediatricians who administer them and to most people who are pro-vaccine. They have no idea that this noxious material is what goes into the creation of a vaccine. And then there's a lot of other stuff. They put adjuvants, which are kinds of extenders, and they have to suspend the culture. But in order to grow a culture of anything, bacteria from the air, really, it likes to settle. Because remember I said in shows before, these are the decomposers of the trophic chain. So if you put a dish out with monkey brains and human stools, rabbit brains and human stools in it, what's going to happen? You're just going to get a bunch of bacteria settling on that from the air and creating a growth. And this is incorporated into vaccine lots.
Okay, so when they talk about antivirals then, or when they try to prescribe antiviral medication, it would appear to me, based upon the discussion and what you're taking us through here, that what they're really doing with these antiviral medications and such is that they are actually inhibiting the healing and the wellness process, because the virus is actually part of the healing process. It's part of the process to repair the body, repair the cells. So make sure my thoughts are correct on this thing. So antiviral medications and pharmaceuticals would be counterproductive to feeling better or the body healing. Would that be correct?
Mike, I don't know a thing about antiviral medication. I don't know what's in it. I can't comment on it. I would say that is a red herring to go down. What I want to concentrate on is the fact that viruses, what they're calling viruses, are healing agents made individually in individual people's bodies to help their cells out, because they are piezoelectric in nature. No one, to my knowledge, has ever said that before. And I have no degrees, and I have no position to argue with virologists and these kinds of people. But I can tell you that I have added 1 + 1 and I have gotten 2. And I am firmly a believer that these viral materials are piezoelectric healing agents as of today, where I am today. Now, I may change my mind down the road, but I don't think so. This, to me, makes complete sense. And let me tell you what happened with polio. They introduced the polio vaccine, which they managed to do a massive scale production of because of this thing called the HeLa cell, which I hope you'll get into in this interview with me.
Yep.
And they told us that this cured polio. It prevented polio. But what happened really in the 1950s when this was given out, this polio vaccine? Children still became paralyzed. They still sickened, and they still got what had always been called polio. But so the health authorities decided they better rename polio, and that's exactly what they did. In order to be classified as a victim of paralytic polio, you had to have paralysis for 6 months. If you hadn't been paralyzed for 6 months, you didn't have polio, no matter what else you had. The precursor of polio, failure, arms and legs beginning to tighten because the neurology wasn't working right. So they instead came up with all these new diseases, and everyone has heard of them. ALS, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, this, that, and the other thing. And guess what? That is all polio. Polio never went away. It stayed. It just was given new names, and the actual polio was given such a narrow definition that a lot fewer people were assigned it. So now they told us that we have all these modern diseases and people get them in their 40s or 50s. And I remember reading my mother's women's magazines when I was like 10 or 12. I was a little bit ahead of my time. And I was reading about things like multiple sclerosis. It shows up in people's 40s. And I was nervous and frightened. Oh my God, what if this happens to me? But these are in the polio family. They're just new names. They're not new diseases. And why does it show up late in life? Because that's when your toxic load has accumulated and starts to affect you on a grand scale.
Well, and by renaming it, it gives the illusion that polio has been eradicated, right? Because they're not using the word polio anymore. I do want to step back to one thing because I'm sure the audience is going to think I didn't follow up on my own question. And so you had mentioned that viruses are healing agents. And what I was trying to say is with antivirals were therefore prohibiting the healing agents from doing their work. That's the track I was on. We don't have to, expand upon it. I just wanted to make sure that I kind of tied that out. Otherwise, it would seem like an open switch to the audience. But they do that with a lot of stuff, Sophia, where they rename things or they give illnesses a certain, generic, a label, if you will. It's not even really a true diagnosis, but it's a label, like fibromyalgia as an example. They don't really know what that is. It's just it's a classification or labeling for symptoms.
Many people who would say that fibromyalgia, lupus, all these autoimmune diseases are also in the polio family. Polio is a giant umbrella term. I mean, it's like saying, I have the flu. Look, didn't I just read you the symptoms of non-paralytic polio from the Mayo Clinic?
Yeah.
Those are the flu symptoms. And people have, someone told me the other day, oh, I have the flu and I've had it now 2 times since December. And I told her the flu is not the flu. There is no such thing as the flu. It's a collection of symptoms that could be attributed to anything. But you can't really call it the flu because there's no such thing as the flu. What is the flu? The flu it could be polio. It could be, something digestive.
Yeah.
When they bashed and banged my walls when I had a water leak and they had to open up my walls downstairs and they put blowers and everything, I became so sick, Mike. I thought I had a horrific flu and it was the beginning of December. And not only did I have the flu, but I had a rash all over my chest and stomach. I didn't know what it was. And guess what it was, Mike? I found out years later when I interviewed Larry Gus, the building biologist. He told me that formaldehyde gas is trapped in the walls of buildings, in houses. And when that happened, when they broke open my walls, I smelled this smell that I vaguely recognized from high school, but I didn't know what it was. And I had formaldehyde poisoning for a week or 2. Now, is that the flu because it was December? No. Do you see what I'm saying about the flu?
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think I mentioned to you that I was sick for about a week, cough, runny nose, watery eyes, and all that stuff. I even had a fever one day. When we do come down with these illnesses or we get sick, that's part of the natural process. So there's a big push, as you know, to get all of these flu shots and to take all of this over-the-counter medication to suppress the symptoms of the cold or the quote-unquote flu. Sometimes I'm trying to figure out what exactly is the true agenda with all this stuff. And I know there's people listening saying, oh, Mike, it's to keep you unhealthy. It's to keep you on the track of having to continue to go back to the doctor and take more of their drugs. But it's a lot deeper than that. It almost seems like it's some crazy experiment. Like it's almost as if we are these lab rats and they're going off on these little tangents and these premises, and they need to go test out their crazy theories, and they're using us as the guinea pigs or the lab rats to test these theories. I mean, I guess the question I'm asking you is, do you have a perspective on why they engage in this, why they misclassify things, why they deceive, why they continue to do things and to implement things that are clearly unhealthy and clearly deceptive? Is it as simple as because, they want to keep us unhealthy and keep us on the pharmaceuticals, or is it much deeper than that?
It really is simple commerce and contracts. If you really want to ask why on the economic level, people will buy what makes them feel better. And if you can suppress their symptoms when they have a cold, and you can get them out of bed and get them to walk around, which is what they want. They don't want to lie in bed and feel horribly crappy. They want to blow their nose less, cough less. They want their eyes to water less, and they want to function. Now, is that a good decision? I would say no. Because when you take these interruptive agents that get in the way of the body's real work, which is what flu and seasonal flu and cold, as they call it, are there for. So November shows up, and what happens? The sunlight wanes, it's colder, and suddenly you're not making as much vitamin D. Suddenly your body is expending more energy staying warm, and your body says, I got to do some rehab here. I have some cell linings and tissue layers that I have to expunge and get rid of, and I've got to make new ones. So you start coughing and sneezing and hacking, and your nose runs and your eyes water, and you feel terrible. And what makes you feel terrible? What makes your muscles and bones ache when you have the quote-unquote flu? It's prostaglandins. This is part of the inflammatory process. These are peptides that your body makes itself. And these are the things that knock you out. The pain that you get from the flu is the interleukin 1 and 2, prostaglandins. I read this a long time ago. And you make different chemicals, neurochemicals, all kinds of agents to create new materials in your body. It's like having a construction crew running through your body with tractor trailers and backhoes, and it's naturally going to hurt on a physical level, and you have to lie still in bed and you have to get through it. So when you take these OTC aids that make you more functional and make you sneeze less and cough less, you're really not dislodging the number of cells that you need to dislodge. And every color mucus, everything that you spit up, the pink kind, the green kind, the yellow kind, the clear kind, all has to do with different tissues. You are literally getting rid of cells and tissues, and you're putting new ones down. So if you don't do that completely, guess what? You're going to have to do it again in 3 weeks.
Okay, so I get that. So basically you're saying it boils down to, I'm not saying it's the only thing, but contracts and commerce. This is why they do what they do.
This is one reason.
That's what I'm saying. It's one reason, yeah.
Okay, so somebody told me that she got a temporary housemate, and this housemate moves in and puts in the refrigerator some food, only it's not real food. It's processed stuff, right?
Yeah.
And this housemate is training to be some kind of lab tech, and she's busy. She's in a training program, and she wants to use a microwave. And there is no microwave in the house. So this is now presenting a problem. So she's eating food, preparing food in a way that you and I would say is not healthy, even though it's conventional. So people do what is expedient. And they are able to sell a lot of medications and a lot of junk foods that taste good and feel good going down. But it's not real food and it's not real medicine. But tell me how big the market is for that stuff. And then all they have to do is put ads on the television about how great this is. And if you take Alka-Seltzer, for colds, you can then go to work. You don't have to miss days from work, which means you get paid. So this is the point. But overall, the body is declining and ailing. They have us in an environment with LED lights now that don't give you the full light spectrum. So you don't produce vitamin D during the day when you're working under these lights, and God help you if you put them in your house as well, because now you're living with them. And so you're not able to do your own biological maintenance at the right threshold. You're under the threshold, which means you're constantly going to be collapsing and things will happen down the road. You might get some serious systemic diseases because for this many years, your body didn't receive the correct nutrition. It wasn't helped. Now let me just go back to, the 1900s, when we started to see the advent of running water in houses and glass windows. Now, it wasn't medical advances that improved people's health in this last century. It was not. It was sunlight coming into homes. And why did people have, diseases, respiratory diseases at the rate that they did, and then those dropped in the 1900s? Not because of medical advances, not because we had aspirin on drugstore shelves. It was because they got light in their houses. Sunlight came through windows. It had a thermal component. It was full spectrum. And those microbes that hung out in the corners of their dwellings dried up and died because of the sun. Sun is a natural disinfectant. The people produced more vitamin D. Therefore, they were sick less, right?
Right.
So that was short-lived because then we got inundated with chemicals and then radiation, wireless radiation. Somebody told me that she traveled to Europe and she had never seen such concentrated wireless in people's houses and buildings and cities as she saw in Europe, which is a lot denser. It's densely packed, Europe. She comes back to the United States and she has a horrific flu. In fact, she got it when she was leaving Europe. So what is this flu? I'm saying it is a reaction to the microwave radiation she received when she was in Europe in this new situation that she hadn't been in before. And after the return to America, having this horrific flu for weeks, she became electrohypersensitive. She can't be around cell phones or Wi-Fi now. So did she just have the flu dropping in and saying hello? No, that flu was a correlation. It was a direct result of the exposure she had had to this particular kind of hazard. And now that hazard, that sensitivity to that hazard has become part of her body.
Okay, so that's very interesting. Well, the first thing that kind of caught my attention, and maybe because I'm not that worldly, is that I didn't realize that they had a much higher level concentration of Wi-Fi and electromagnetic frequencies in Europe.
I mean, we're crowding our space with electronics, that's true. But the density of Europe, the smaller apartments, the stacked housing, and then everybody's fond of the same kind of devices there as well.
Yeah.
I have found now, having read a book that was sitting on my shelf, I'm sorry to say, for a couple of years, I didn't read it fast enough. But you know what? You read everything at the right time. So that's what happened. And this book, I really urge people to get it. Even borrow it from the library if you have to. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, Lacks. And it was a New York Times bestseller. And if we have enough time, maybe we'll be able to discuss why. But Henrietta Lacks was a woman who lived in Roanoke, Virginia in the 1950s. And she was a sharecropper. She had grown up on a tobacco, well, I don't know if you should call it a plantation or not, but her family, her antecedents were slaves. She was part white. And I think her grandfather was a white man, slave owner. And Henrietta was living on tobacco farmland as a child. And she moved from the farm to Baltimore when she was around 30. And that's when she developed a horrible, horrible cervical tumor. It bled. It was very, very sensitive. And she went to have it looked at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And the examining surgeon took a piece of it, didn't tell her. And it was sent to the lab, the tissue lab of Dr. George Guy. And they cultured tissues because they were looking at the time in the 1950s for a way to grow human cells outside the human body. And they had not succeeded yet. Every time they put a sample of somebody's cells, tissue, diseased, non-diseased, in a petri dish and tried to give it some nutrients and grow it, it would always die. So Henrietta's tumor cells really surprised them. They took off. They doubled like crazy. They accumulated by the millions, and they didn't seem to need very much nurturing whatsoever. And remember, these are cancer cells. These are cervical cancer cells. So Henrietta died 8 months after she was examined. Her body was absolutely rife with tumors. She was in horrible pain. She has left us, though, this legacy called the HeLa cell. When they put her cells into the first lab dish, they named it, as they did at the time, after the first two letters of the person's first and last name. So Henrietta, H-E, Lacks, L-A. So they became the HeLa cells. And HeLa cells are the most popular cell line, pretty much, in biotech. And they have been sold by the millions and billions ever since Henrietta walked into that Johns Hopkins lab. And they have sold for as much as $10,000 a vial. Everybody buys HeLa cells because the worst research students, the beginning students, can manage to make them grow. And I want to just read here from the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, a few passages, but I'll start with one, and I want you to comment on it, Mike. Henrietta's cells could float through the air on dust particles. These are cancer cells. They could travel from one culture to the next on unwashed hands or used pipettes. They could ride from lab to lab on researchers' coats and shoes or through ventilation systems. And they were strong. If just one HeLa cell landed in a culture dish, it took over, consuming all the nutrient media and filling all the space.
Now, Sophia, these HeLa cells, the question I have is this something that was unique to Henrietta Lacks, or is this something that everybody possesses?
Unique to Henrietta Lacks. They came out of her body and they were grown ad infinitum. And now, guess what, Mike? Everybody possesses them. They were implanted in the polio vaccine, HeLa cells, because they were able to carry the so-called polio virus on their backs, piggyback, and they were able to bring that virus into other people's bodies. The taxi cab was the HeLa cell. And so HeLa cells, one researcher told me, are in every vaccine today.
Okay, so they took something that was really a one-off, isolated to Henrietta Lacks, and they decided that they were going to distribute it en masse to the population through vaccines.
In 1953, William Scherer and Jerome Siverton, they were scientists from the University of Minnesota, they found that HeLa cells could be infected with all three types of poliovirus being studied. And so then Leo Szilard, the atomic scientist, figured out how to irradiate the HeLa cells so that the poliovirus could actually be cultured on them. So that's the key. So HeLa was the first continuously culturable human cell line. The first one. Because it was like the Superman of cancer cells. It could tolerate crappy nutritional conditions, horrible handling, and it still managed to grow. And it was cheap. It was really cheap. You could get so many. I mean, when I said $10,000 a vial, most of the HeLa cells sold for a lot less than that, $100 a vial. So the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis learned about these cheap HeLa cell cultures. And at the time, it was spending tons of money on rhesus monkeys to experiment on, to test the Salk polio vaccine. So it decided to switch to HeLa cells. And the Tuskegee Institute was tasked with distributing HeLa cells. It was a prestigious Black university. Now, I'm going to explain this about HeLa cells. So even though they were cancer cells, HeLa, I'll read from the book, still shared many basic characteristics with normal cells. They produced proteins and communicated with one another like normal cells. They divided and generated energy. They expressed genes and regulated them. And they were susceptible to quote-unquote infection, which made them an optimal tool for synthesizing and studying all kinds of stuff. So let's talk about this infection, all right? So they are basically a sick cell, S-I-C-K. And that means they're looking for help. That means that when you bring them something like the polio virus, now this is the not the cause of polio. This is that sugar-coated crystalline thing that they're claiming is the cause of polio, but it's really a healing agent. So that sugar-coated thing, cancer cells are sugar-consuming. We know this. So when you send a sugar-coated, quote-unquote, virus to the cancer cell, it will say, hey, hello, thank you, I love you, let's get together, right? So that's how you could, quote-unquote, infect the HeLa cancer cell with the polio virus. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. So I guess my question is, it's probably very rudimentary, so just bear with me. So were they using the HeLa cells to distribute disease? Was that their intent? Was their intent to infect the population with other diseases?
I don't know. I cannot speak to that, Mike, but all I can tell you is in their construct of what a vaccine is, they were pretending or claiming to be introducing poliovirus in a small quantity into people's bodies such that polio antibodies could be made. That's the premise of a vaccine. And how do they actually carry the poliovirus into the vaccine? They do it with the HeLa cell because that becomes a taxi cab.
Okay, I got it.
We have heard, that in the conspiracy world that the Salk polio vaccine had cancer virus in it. I've heard that ad nauseum. And my explanation for that cancer is not caused by a virus. Cancer is caused by mitochondrial failure. So my explanation for this idea that polio vaccine contained the cancer virus is it really contained the HeLa cells carrying the polio virus. That's my particular explanation. Others might disagree with it. But what really you get out of this book, which is study by Rebecca Skloot, the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, it's a study of Henrietta's life, history, her family, and the story behind the HeLa cell. And it's really fascinating. I want people to understand, because I was horrified when I learned this from the book, that our tissues are being saved by the medical field. And I'm going to segue to another cell line called the MO cell line. So there was a guy, he was a surveyor on the Alaska pipeline in the 70s. His name was John Moore, Moore. And he had hairy cell leukemia. And his spleen was so malignant, it was so suffused with tumor that it weighed 22 pounds. And he was sent to UCLA to have this enormous spleen removed. And he was then advised that he needed monitoring every few months. So he went back to UCLA from Alaska, and he thought, oh, they're taking such good care of me. These people really care about me. But what he discovered was that UCLA was developing the blood and bone marrow they were getting out of his body as they monitored him. And there was a Dr. David Gold, Golde, at UCLA who had been sort of the primary guy looking after Moore. And he had filed for a patent on Moore's cells. And apparently they produced some very valuable proteins. And Gold had signed agreements with a biotech company that gave him stocks and financing that was worth more than $3.5 million to commercially develop and scientifically investigate what Gold was calling the Mo cell line. A Mo cell line, this is, we're talking the late 70s, had a market value of $3 billion. So when we donate our blood to the Red Cross and when you send your DNA to, 23andMe, you're really giving them biological material and giving them permission, basically, to use it for quote-unquote research purposes. So we don't know is that when we leave our tissues behind, and we're not talking about used Kleenexes when I say tissues, in a doctor's office, as you say, this is fair game. And it is protected now by court rulings. Anything they do with our tissues, once they change them through what's called, quote unquote, human ingenuity, they are patentable. And this came about from the very famous lawsuit in 1980, Diamond versus Chakrabarty. So would you like me to get into that, Mike, or do you want to comment?
Yes. Yeah, let's get into that because this is very interesting.
Yeah. So in the late 70s, there was a General Electric microbiologist by the name of Ananda Chakrabarty. He was born in Calcutta, and he was specializing in directed evolution. He had managed to tinker with what we know as oil-eating bacteria. As weird as it sounds, there are bacterial forms that metabolize hydrocarbons. They're called Pseudomonas putida. And Chakrabarty had found a way to enhance the oil appetite of Pseudomonas putida so that it could eat up 2/3 of an oil spill. So apparently the Pseudomonas putida had not been able to gobble up that much oil, but his version of it, yes. So he filed a patent. And the U.S. Patent Office said, no, you cannot do this. The patent code isn't intended for living things. So they denied his patent application. But then the United States Court of Customs and Patent Appeals ruled that no, the fact that microorganisms are alive is without legal significance for the purposes of patent law. So Sidney Diamond, he was the U.S. Commissioner of Patents and Trademarks at the time, which is 1980. He took this to the Supreme Court. And this is the case, 1980, Diamond versus Chakrabarty. And the Supreme Court said, a live human-made microorganism is patentable subject matter under Title 35 United States Code 101. Respondent's microorganism constitutes a manufacture or composition of matter within that statute. So what they were saying was, if human beings can alter biological forms, they are no longer natural and they can be patented. So the Diamond case, Diamond versus Chakrabarty, that's the case that set the ground for patenting living things, including genetically modified animals and cell lines. So that was the first patent filed for a genetically modified organism in America.
So this is very interesting, right? So this is saying that it's actually taking nature or a living organism, and legally they have parsed it now to say that if you somehow alter it or change it or enhance it, whatever it may be, it could be a patent. So this leaves the floodgates open to all kinds of experimentation with living things, right? I would think.
That's right. And when you leave your tissues behind, you are basically donating them and giving up claim to them. Now, the Lax family is poor. The relatives of Henrietta, they have not received a dime for HeLa cells. They only recently, with the publication of this book, got any recognition for being related to a woman whose cancer cells changed biology, or let's just say enhanced biological experimentation to the degree that they did.
Well, I didn't know anything about her until I read your newsletter. I mean, I was ignorant to it completely. So I hope that the listening audience is taking this in, but you can see how this system operates. It's not to the benefit of humanity.
Mike, the Supreme Court of California ruled against Sidney Diamond in this way. I'm paraphrasing. When tissues are removed from your body, any claim you have to them is gone. This is from the book that Rebecca Skloot wrote. When you leave tissues in a doctor's office or a lab, you abandon them as waste, and anyone can take your garbage and sell it. Since John Moore, the Alaska surveyor, had abandoned his cells, they were no longer a product of his body. That's what the court said. This is the Supreme Court of California. They had been transformed into an invention, and they were now the product of David Gould's inventive effort. They belonged to someone else. Okay, so the court opined, Supreme Court of California, that if they were to rule in Moore's favor, they might, now this is a direct quote, destroy the economic incentive to conduct important medical research, and that if you give patients property rights in their tissues, you're going to, quote, hinder research by restricting access to the necessary raw materials.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Again, it goes back to what you were saying before, right? It's a system of commerce and economics, and this is what they're saying here. Some people will say, well, without these samples or these tissues, how are we going to be able to do medical research and so on? My answer would be that there are legitimate ways to do that by contracting with people that, if they're in the hospital or whatnot, where they can get these samples. So what bugs me about this is that, I've been to, as an example, Sophia, the dermatologist a couple of times, and I had to have certain moles biopsied and sent off to pathology. So how do I know what the pathologist did with that biopsy, with that sample?
Mike, it's sitting in a little dish named MI-MeWe.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with it. So they have a little place for me over there, and they've got me categorized, and along with many, 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 many other people. So I don't know, Sophia. This is, it's just not right. I know I'm stating the obvious, but this is just not right. Unbelievable. It really is. And I would say that if they were actually doing something good with this stuff, if they were actually trying to really solve the mysteries of disease and to bring true cures to the world, you might get a little more comfortable with this approach. But we really haven't seen that, I don't think. What we see is a lot of deception, a lot of lies, and a lot of ways to keep us unhealthy. So their argument, in my view, doesn't hold a lot of water. They need to do this because otherwise it would hinder medical research.
That's how they talk. Yeah.
Right.
But, I'm going to read from Skloot's book because it's really mind-blowing. So I said in my summary that there are gazillions of tissue samples being held by medicine, increasing by more gazillions every year. So what she wrote was, the samples come from routine medical procedures, tests, operations, clinical trials, and research donations. Now, when I say research donations, I don't mean money. I mean somebody saying, all right, here, you can have this for research, okay? They sit in lab freezers, on shelves, or in industrial vats of liquid nitrogen. They're stored at military facilities, the FBI, and the National Institutes of Health. They're in biotech company labs and most hospitals. Biobanks store appendixes, ovaries, skin, sphincters, testicles, fat, even foreskins from most circumcisions. We're talking about a massive, massive scale, and that's a quote from the chief of staff of the NIH. So in 2009, this book was written in 2010, the NIH invested $13.5 million to develop a bank for the samples taken from newborns nationwide. A few years ago, the National Cancer Institute started gathering what will be millions and millions of tissue samples for mapping cancer genes. Now, this is the mid to 2005 or so, going from her timetable when she's writing the book. And the public has been sending all of their little saliva and whatever to personalized DNA companies, 23andMe, Ancestry.com. And these companies only provide customers with their personal genealogical information if they first sign a form granting permission for those samples to be stored for future research.
Plus, it came out that they were actually doctoring the results of those DNA tests. So not only did you give up your DNA, but what you got back most likely has nonsense in it.
It's not the correct information. Yeah.
Right. No, it's not the correct information. They've doctored it. This came out in, I guess, some articles about a year ago or so, where I read that they were putting into those results that they were giving back to the people that took the DNA test for companies like 23andMe, some additional ancestry, if you will, that didn't really exist. And most notably, I believe it was ancestry from Africa, where it didn't exist. But they were putting it on the results anyway and sending it back to you. So then you would think that you had African ancestry.
Well, Mike, you know what we could do? We could try this. Next time we're in a doctor's office, we could claim our sphincter and say, give it back to me.
Yeah. Give me back my liver. I brought my cooler. I don't know, Sophia. This is just, boy, oh boy. Like the rabbit hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper. And what are they doing with all this stuff? I guess is the question I have. And I don't expect you to answer that. It's a rhetorical question. I'm sure everybody's asking themselves as they listen to this show. What in God's name could they possibly be doing with all of this stuff?
Mike, they just store it. And they have computerized ways of categorizing it and looking it up. And I mean, it's sitting in biobanks, right? It's
right.
like I was informed many years ago that the stuff that we recycle, it doesn't get recycled. It sits in these giant warehouses, all this unused, they're not doing anything with those tin cans and plastic bags because it's too expensive still.
That doesn't surprise me. There was a big thing back in New Jersey going, I guess, around 25 years ago, when there was a big push, to recycle and stuff. And the local newspaper there did an expose, and they found that all of this talk about recycling and all that, they were taking all the recycled material and they were taking it to the dump with the rest of the garbage, the rest of the trash. So they weren't separating anything. They had everybody going through the process of 2 bins and putting your recyclables out on this day and your regular trash on the next day and all this stuff. And everybody's going through all this stuff thinking, hey, I'm contributing to the environment. At the end of the day, these people were just putting it, in the same truck, in the same landfill. And, that's just the world we live in. It's just a world of lies and deception. These are the types of things that go on. So you're saying that it's all sitting someplace in a big warehouse or a big pile someplace does not surprise me at all.
Mike, I also learned recently that if you recycle a cardboard box and it has any tape on it, like cellophane packing tape, or it goes in the trash. So you have to yank off all the tape yourself, which takes an awful lot of time. Or you put that box in the trash or in the recycling and it will go into the landfill. I was pretty horrified to learn this. I don't know. I mean, I would wonder about the tape on boxes and wonder about what do they do with that? Does it get pulped in with the paper that they're recycling, or do they? No, right? I mean, they don't recycle the bottle caps from all those water bottles. So there's bottle caps that go in the landfills. I mean, it's scary. It's scary to think of how much trash we create, most of us. And I don't. I create very, very little trash, I'm proud to say.
Well, I mean, not to go off on a diatribe here, but, they always want to blame the end user for all of the problems. You and I use too much plastic. You and I shouldn't be using straws. You and I shouldn't be doing or using these types of light bulbs, and so on and on and on and on, right? The truth of the matter is they never go after the manufacturer, the people that are actually creating the plastic. They never do that. They're allowed to continue to generate as much plastic as their heart desires and then put the onus of doing something with that plastic and helping the environment on you and me and everybody else. It would seem to me if you want to solve the problem, you got to solve the problem up front, not at the back end. The front end says you have to go after people that are creating the plastics and tell them you've got to come up with a different way, biodegradable, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but it seems to me that that's the real way to solve the problem. It's not to continue to go after the end user because it's doomed to fail.
Mike, I just want to say that if you do point to the end user, that's where you create the mindset for sustainability. And while we're on the interview subject still, which we are a tiny bit, I want to mention that it struck me. You had said when we were in the pre-show chat that, they created a giant apparatus with this virus hunting, as Nancy Banks calls it. And I believe now, I had some afterthoughts having completed the newsletter, that this enormous industry of engineered viruses, which a lot of people who are aware that viruses are not what they tell us, those people dismiss engineered viruses whole hog. And I would say at this point, having thought about it, I I'm inclined to say, no, they are engineering viruses. And what are those viruses? And my theory, it's very rudimentary, is that they have studied under their electron microscopes and in their nanobiotech exactly how to copy these healing agents that biology makes itself, that are crystalline in nature, piezoelectric. They have various kinds of coatings and they have affinities for various kinds of cells. And these are the engineered viruses that they're slipping into the body, maybe through the vaccine mechanism, but they are actually making materials, subcellular materials, that know how to slip into different kinds of cells and do different kinds of things, affect different kinds of biological changes, okay? That's the apparatus that is now in the biotech field. They have found out how to make these viruses themselves, but they're not disease causing necessarily. They might be, for all we know, the way they're making them, but the original virus is not a disease causing agent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and I agree with you 100% as far as especially the engineered part of it. I mean, to me, there's no question that they're doing that. Engineering. There's no question. This is what they like to do. If I go back to earlier in the conversation, they're looking to tinker with stuff. They're looking to experiment with stuff. They want to see how far they can push the envelope. So to me, engineering viruses and seeing its effect on humans and what it means and what it does and what it doesn't do, well, I think that's right up their alley. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this thing they call IgT, immunoprophylaxis by gene transfer, John Rappaport has written a few newsletters that mention it, but they are looking for ways to change. For instance, the white blood cells make our antibodies right now, and they should remain doing that. But IgT is a process that's going to replace vaccines, my belief. And they're going to teach, they've already announced this, our muscle cells to produce antibodies. Just, completely running around the white blood cells altogether. So all I can think of, and this is very unsophisticated, but white blood cells wait outside the gut wall to receive what is being passed through the tight junctions when it's ready. And in many cases, that material is unready. And that's why we develop allergies, because the gut wall opens early and it lets out stuff that isn't properly disassembled. So our antibody production is the result of what the white cells receive through the gut wall. And they're going to do, by this IgT process, they're going to inject us with genetically modified ways of teaching our muscle cells to make antibodies. I don't know what the process is, but now the white cells won't be part of the defense system. Do you see what I'm saying? The muscle cells will be taught how to do something, and they don't normally do that. So what kind of result is that going to have?
Well, the things that they are involved in, Sophia, altering our bodies, altering nature, it's what they do. It's what they do. And I personally don't see a lot of good coming out of it. I don't. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I come from the perspective that the human body, the design, is an amazing creation. And then you have this entity, right? These people, whatever you want to call them, coming in and trying to screw with it and futz with it and trying to make it into something that they want to make it into. It's just this constant experimentation. I don't know. Food for thought, I guess. Look, I don't want to get too philosophical on this thing or too deep with this, but I do want to say that the newsletter is excellent. The amount of research that went into it is phenomenal, and it is incredibly thought-provoking. It really is. I mean, there was stuff in your newsletter that I didn't know anything about. So, in fact, I had to read it twice, and I highlighted a bunch of areas just to make sure that I, understood it enough so that I can have an intelligent conversation with you. But really, hats off to you on this one. I mean, all of your newsletters are great, but this one is exceptional.
That's very nice of you, Mike. Again, I didn't know where it was going to go, and I didn't know that there was this much information that I was going to dredge up, and some of it was very, very interesting and new to me, like this whole tobacco mosaic virus. And we didn't even get into what tobacco does as a plant. It's an amazing plant. And people in the world of science have been very interested in tobacco. So if people want to subscribe to the newsletter, I might actually post this one someday. I need to post some more recent newsletters on my newsletters tab at sofiasmallstorm.com. That's my blog. And I haven't blogged or done much with my website for a month or so because I've been migrating to a new server, and there were all kinds of issues involved with that. But again, I'm about to write another hell of a newsletter. I'm just warning.
What else would it be?
I don't know, Mike. Sometimes I think I can't keep writing newsletters that are this intense because I'm going to burn out or something. Then I'll have to take a vacation for 6 months. And then what will my subscribers do? They'll all be mad at me.
Yeah, they get upset when you disappear for a while. Yeah.
No, but I've always delivered the newsletters. I'm a little behind, but I deliver, and I'm about to write a new one, and I might have to make it a double issue just to catch up. So anyway, thank you to all the listeners for listening, and I do hope people read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It's a very easy book to read. It's very interesting, and it'll get you thinking. Really, it will.
Well, Sofia, thank you so much for coming back on the show. And like I said, this is really the inaugural show for 2019. I did have a show out about Denny Lane, but this is the start of the regular interview series. So I really do appreciate you talking to us about this. And it's appropriate to have you as my first guest for 2019.
Thank you, Mike. And I have retooled my Avatar product store. It's now mobile friendly. I'm very happy that was finally done. And I have a great new laundry powder, cleaning powder. That's on the, I think it's on the Sun and Skin page, but I really want people to try this laundry powder. I think you're using it, Mike, right?
I am. And I'm not doing this to pump up your tires, okay? That stuff works great. It works great. And so I've used it with my laundry, and I'm telling you what, I'm not ever going to go back to any other type of soap.
Thank you, Mike. I was very surprised to see how well it worked, and very little you use, just like a tablespoon. And it makes your clothes smell so clean. It's got a very concentrated soap form in it. And my soap maker friend, my new friend, Christine in Minnesota, she is a genius. Her father was an engineer, a very brilliant engineer, and she has gone into the soap making business, and she's branching out from there. I've got her bar soap as well. It's absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to be carrying her soap flakes, which you can just put a few in your hand, rub them on your head, and you get this incredible lather. So I just am starting with these products. But I'll tell you something, Mike. I put some of that laundry powder in my bathtub, very little, and I cleaned my tub with it, and it was amazing, way better than any of the commercial stuff. So you can buy it and put it in a little, like a shaker can or spice, or just a jar, and shake some into your tub, clean your counters, dishes, cleaning pots with that. It's just amazing.
Yeah, a little goes a long way, too. I put 2 teaspoons in with my wash, and that's a large load. The clothes come out really clean. And like you said, Sofia, they smell clean. They don't have that, supermarket detergent smell to them or that fragrance. It's just good. It's natural.
Well, I will be selling that in larger quantities. Right now, it's only £1, but I am working on ways to sell that larger quantities of that. And then I have another little trick up my sleeve that hasn't appeared in the store yet, but I've been testing that on friends. And I think I'm going to send you one, Mike, as a little delayed Christmas gift, because I was very behind on my Christmas gift. So anyway, thank you to everybody for listening. I do hope you visit avatarproducts.com, because that's how I stay alive. And lots of iodine, magnesium. There's a magnesium gel, which you can use as a deodorant. A lot of people order magnesium deodorant from me, and I love that I can sell it to them, and it works so well. But that roll-on bottle cannot be refilled. However, if you buy gel, you can use the gel instead. You just smear a little under your arms. It lasts a lot longer, and it is a way better deal for the money. So I want people to start using magnesium gel instead of the roll-on deodorant.
All right, Sofia, so I'll catch up with you with the next newsletter. We'll do another show, and we'll have another very interesting conversation to enlighten our audience.
Thank you, Mike. Bye.
Bye-bye. And that concludes another Sage or Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the description box below. And as always, I would like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can find all my social media and web links by visiting my hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to check out my music and album releases. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone with the next show. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
Hey there, girl, come on over here. Don't be shy, there's nothing to fear. I like your style, I like the way that you move. I love your smile, I really dig your groove. Take a trip with me, let your soul be free. Come on, girl, we can change the world. Let's do it now, let's make it real. Hey there, girl, it's a brand new day. Gonna shake things up and do it our way. Spread your wings and come fly with me. We won't look back because love is still free. Take a trip with me, let your soul be free. Come on, girl, we can change the world. Let's do it now, let's make it real. They're playing with our heads so we don't think. Trapped in a lie where eyes don't blink. Angry plastic freaks always in your face. We gotta do something to change this place. Come on, girl, look to the sun. Reach for the sky, we're gonna have some fun. Let's change the world, let's do it now. Hey there, girl, come on over here. Don't be shy, there's nothing to fear. I like your style, I like the way that you move. I love your smile, I really dig your groove. Take a trip with me, let your soul be free. Come on, girl, we can change the world. Let's do it now, let's make it real. They're playing